What do you do when your partner wants to have sex, but you don't? Or vice versa? And then how do you make that decision? I'm coming up on 24 years of marriage to my husband, Patrick, who I call Patty. And for a majority of this time, these questions were coming up for us daily. It seemed like Patty always wanted to have sex, and it seemed like I never did. And this caused a lot of tension and resentment between us. And if this hasn't happened to you, I'm glad. And then I have to tell you, statistically speaking, this hasn't happened to you yet. Amy Muse, who runs the Sexual Health and Relationships Lab at York University, found through a series of studies that approximately 80% of people had experienced this in the past month, and 95% of people had experienced it in the past year. That's almost all. So this is one of the most common challenges faced by couples. Even though it's extremely common, it can also be very serious, leading to breakups and divorce. So these questions and how you answer them, it becomes important. So how do you make this decision? What criteria do you use to decide whether to do it or not? Most of us, we're going by how we feel and or what our genitals are doing. But how many of us actually understand how our minds and bodies work together to create sexual desire? I thought I knew, and then I found out I didn't really understand, which has led to the last couple of years where I've read thousands of pages of books and articles and scientific research studies, discovering all the things I thought I understood about sex but didn't really know. I thought a libido worked like this. You suddenly feel like you want to have sex. And it could be as simple as seeing someone that you find attractive. This is what scientists refer to as spontaneous desire. And according to Emily Nagoski, she's a world-renowned sex educator. And she estimates this is true for approximately 75% of men. This has never happened to me, which made sense when I learned that only approximately 15% of women experience spontaneous desire. Many more of us experience what the scientists refer to as responsive desire. Men can also have responsive desire, but the way this works is that the person has to be turned on, already sexually aroused, before they ever feel like they want to have sex. When I learned this, it was like an epiphany for me because it meant I wasn't broken. And it also made sense why, even though I never really felt like having sex, I liked it when I did. And I wish sexual arousal was as easy as this, just press the button. But for many of us, it can be much more complicated. I think we all know that we have to learn what the turn-ons are and keep doing that. What we may not understand is that we also have to learn what the turn-offs are and stop doing that. And for some of us, only when these two things are both happening can we ever actually reach sexual arousal, which begs the question, how do you know if your partner is sexually aroused or not? So there have been times throughout our marriage when Patty and I are getting frisky, and I'm really excited, and yet, it's like the Sahara down there. Believe it or not, me and my dry vagina, and this guy and his nocturnal penile tumescence, also known as slumber lumber or morning wood, we're experiencing the same physiological phenomenon that scientists refer to as arousal non-concordance. And all this means is that there's a disconnect between how we feel and what our genitals are doing. And this isn't happening just occasionally. According to studies conducted in labs, this is happening with men approximately 50% of the time during these experiments. And women, 90% of the time. And what tells us, what the science tells us, is that our genitals, They're not good indicators, accurate indicators of sexual arousal or desire. The only way to know if your partner is turned on or not is to ask them. So now that I've given you the high-level, 4-minute crash course in sexual desire and arousal, so if we go by how we feel and we have responsive desire, we may never feel like it because something sexual already has to be going on before we're ever going to feel like it. We have to say yes to something. So maybe how we feel isn't the best criteria to use. And our genitals, we just learned that at least half the time, they're doing their own thing. So between our fickle genitals and our finicky libidos, it should be clear, we don't actually have conscious control over this part of our sexuality. But we could take control. We could take control by using different criteria, better criteria to make this decision based on science. In all the other parts of our lives, we allow science to help us make better decisions. Just to take a couple easy examples, exercise and nutrition. If I only ever did what I felt like doing, I'd never work out. And I'd be living on a diet primarily made up of popcorn, cookies, and beer. But I don't do that, not since college. I don't do that. We don't do that. We make decisions for the betterment of our health and well-being based on science. Why not also do that with sex? All of these benefits, they're backed by over 65 different scientific research studies. And each one of these benefits has certain aspects of sex that make them true. Many of them are achieved through orgasm alone, but not all. So as a general rule, if you're in a committed relationship and you have made a habit of having mutually satisfying sex at least once a week, you'll enjoy these benefits, with a few exceptions worth mentioning. There have been several studies, but 2 studies that came out of Harvard which have shown that it's a high frequency of ejaculation, not just sex, which lower the risk of prostate cancer, and it can do this by as much as 50%. And Doctors Beverly Whipple and Barry Komisaruk, they've been studying the connection between the brain and the genitals for many years at Rutgers University. And what they've found is that it isn't sex per se, but it's vaginal stimulation and orgasm that block pain of menstrual cramps, chronic back pain, and yes, even headaches. There goes that excuse. And last but not least, a study published in the American Journal of Cardiology conducted by Dr. Susan Hall. She found that men who had sex 2 to 3 times a week had 45% lower risk of cardiovascular disease than men who were having sex once a month or less. So although my rule of once a week, it'll get you part of the way there, for this one, if you want the full benefits, you got to step up your game. I feel like sex is a linchpin of health. It's the fountain of youth, and it's a key to a long-lasting and happy relationship. Oh, and then there's that other thing, where it's one of the most pleasurable experiences available to the human being. And if sex isn't pleasurable for you, that's a whole other talk. But what I will say is that it can be, and don't give up. As I mentioned earlier, Patty and I, we struggled with this decision, these questions, to do it or not, and it was causing problems in our relationship. And it was one of these issues we couldn't really figure out how to solve it. And one day he came to me with an experiment he wanted. And he said, what if, for the next 30 days, every time I want to have sex, you just say yes? And I suddenly pictured this guy. This is my husband, Patty. And I suddenly pictured him chasing me around the house with an erection for a month. And I said, no. And he said, why? And I said, because I don't want to have sex when I don't want to have sex. But then I realized I was always having sex when I didn't want to have sex. I didn't know what it was called back then, but I have responsive desire. So I actually agreed to this experiment. And as soon as I said yes, I thought, I wonder if Costco sells lube. I'm not going to lie, the first few days were like a sexorama. But after that, it tapered off to like once, twice a week. And as it turned out, Patty wasn't asking to have sex all the time because he wanted to have sex all the time. He was asking all the time just to get me to say yes occasionally. And all of that negotiation and the tension and resentment between us, it dissolved. And when you have sex with your partner, your bodies are flooded with feel-good hormones that promote bonding and intimacy. And we could feel that. Not just the physical intimacy, but our emotional intimacy was blossoming too. In fact, this experiment went so well, we never stopped. And now the deal is anytime either one of us wants to have sex, we just say yes. And this has worked well for us. And now I instigate more often than he does, not because I feel sexual desire, because I still don't until after we get started, but because when we aren't having sex often enough, I really miss that connection with him. I don't want to brag, but my husband and I, we are one of the happiest couples we know. And I needed to show you a different picture of him. There are a lot of great things about our relationship, but the immediate pleasure and intimacy that sex brings to our relationship, it kind of smooths out all the rough edges. Sex life definitely contributes to our happiness, whereas it used to be one of our greatest points of contention. So I hope, if you're faced with these decisions in the future, that you'll consider saying yes, as loving acceptance of your partner, as a beautiful gift to your relationship, but also for your own health, longevity, and happiness. Thank you.